Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
Covering both sides of the big issues with the analysis you trust on News Radio 1040 WHO.
Need to know with Jeff Angel is the program. Chances are you spend more time at work with your coworkers than you do with your spouse. And I have heard people talk about their work wife or their work husband. But is that really, really healthy? Let's talk to licensed clinical psychologist Dr. Shannan Crawford on the Davidson Family Dentistry Newsmaker line. Dr. Crawford, welcome to Iowa Radio. Hi. Good morning. Yeah. So what do you think, Dr. Crawford? I mean, I've heard people use this phrase, their work wife. Is that healthy? Is that okay?
I think each situation has different nuances, but by even language construction alone, when we add spouse, the brain does auto-populate templates that can lean toward romance, even though they may be meaning bestie, and there's tons of great examples of how that works well. But human nature, when we spend a lot of time with people, there tends to be an attraction created.
Well, and Dr. Crawford, I agree with you. One of the issues that I thought about when I knew we were going to talk about this is, what's called the emotional affair, which I think then leads to you starting to compare that person to your real spouse. To me, there's just a lot of dangers here.
Absolutely. So our brain is naturally binary. So when we idealize one thing, the brain will naturally devalue the other. So when you go to work, many people feel like I'm in my sweet spot, I'm in my lane, and then I'm running after this goal with this person with common interests. So there's a natural affinity and affection and enjoyment. And so unconsciously, when we go home, by contrast, if we're not equally stewarding as much energy and positivity at home, it's natural to devalue the spouse at home. And that's not a fair comparison because the person at work is truly a fantasy. You don't have to do chores and taxes and crying babies with the person at work. It's this very artificial setting, and so it's natural to then the whole real life to feel less wonderful and exciting and glamorous.
So, Dr. Crawford, I also want to be realistic about it. There are people at work that you get along with better than some other people at work, like people you become closer to. So what are the boundaries here?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want a culture where we're not enjoying our colleagues by any means. I think a couple ingredients is when we recognize I'm using secrecy of any kind, of like, oh, I won't share this part, or having long dinners, lunches, meals outside of the office, just the two of you, and there's nobody else knowing about it. Having a work meeting is one thing as long as there's transparency. So at Crawford Clinics, a lot of what we do to prepare couples is, have a great relationship with colleagues, but make sure there's a shared calendar, shared invites, that, if your iPhone links to things, that there's a level of accountability so we're not stepping into a secrecy and then creating that fantasy relationship.
Dr. Crawford, I also was looking at a survey that I found very interesting, which is the younger the worker is, the more inappropriate they think it is to have a work spouse. So why are younger people turning against this idea and older people more receptive to it in your view?
It's fascinating. So there could be lots of variables, but one large trend we've seen is a lot of these kids are the ones that are now adults their family was shattered by affairs. And so there may be more of a caution of disillusionment. There's a lot more reactive of fear of going, hey, let's be transparent and authentic about what's actually happening and not laugh it off. And then secondly, I think there's a tendency to be more connected to emotion and recognizing emotion does lead to emotional affairs, and those are just as painful to the other spouse as a physical affair. And so I think millennials are kind of tapping into some of those nuances that older generations tended to just identify an affair as a physical act rather than the emotional entanglement.
That is fascinating and right on. Dr. Shannan Crawford is a licensed clinical psychologist. Dr. Crawford, thanks for joining me today.